I'm just surprised you didn't mention, today there's a lot of tumult at the FDA. RFK, and I'll be specific about it, has promoted an environment in which political appointees.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode. The famous Rob Califf.
Rob Califf, I've been FDA Commissioner twice, and people ask me today, what's the biggest health problem in the U.S.? My answer is wealth inequality.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of KLF Deep Dive. I'm here with the famous Rob Califf, and I was bold enough to ask, and he was kind enough to accept the opportunity to be on this podcast. I'm really excited to have him, but I'm going to let him introduce himself before I jump into some of the questions we have, and we'll go from there.
Howdy, it's good to be on your show. I'm Rob Califf. I've been FDA Commissioner twice, and I'm currently unretired from Duke University for the second time, and have the title of instructor in medicine like I was in 1980.
It's not even on the list of questions I thought I'd get into, but how does someone even get approached to be FDA Commissioner? That seems like the ultimate in someone's career, and you've done it twice now. So
yeah, it's kind of interesting. The work that I had done putting together the Duke Clinical Research Institute and being very involved in product development, and that started because literally almost the day I was named director of the Duke Coronary Care Unit, I was still a fellow at the time, but the director quit, so I was fellow and attending for a while on call 12 out of 14 nights. But almost literally that day, the first angiogram was done in a patient with acute MI, and it was a blood clot in the coronary arteries. We had computing that other places didn't have, so we became a coordinating center, and that quickly blossomed into multinational clinical trials trying to figure out how to treat heart attack and unstable angina and acute heart failure. That led to tons of interactions with the FDA because a lot of the trials we did led to either a new label or introduction to the market of new products. And somehow through that, I got asked to interview twice in Republican administrations for FDA commissioner, but I flunked the abortion test. I could not pass the abortion test that they had. I don't consider myself pro-abortion, but I'm pro-choice of people controlling their own destinies. And then, I wasn't really thinking about it, and Peggy Hamburg had decided to step down and literally called me up and said, maybe you should be the next commissioner, but the president has to ask you. And at that point, I had sort of peaked out at my career at Duke. It had been a great career. And I thought, I never served in Vietnam. I came up during the Vietnam War. So I had my chance for national service and went up to FDA as a civil servant for a year. And then I had some interactions with President Obama, and he seemed to like it okay and asked me to come back and interview for commissioner. That's literally how it happened. Now, fortunately, I passed the interview despite the fact that half of it was spent in a heated debate about Tar Heels versus Blue Devils in basketball. He's a huge Tar Heel fan, unfortunately for him. But the second time around, I felt like I'd done my civil service and felt good about what I had done and was not even thinking about it when I got a call basically saying, we can't find anyone else to take the job. It was in the middle of the pandemic. And I don't know, the way I grew up, if you get a call from the White House, you need to take it seriously. So I don't know if it's really that way for everybody, but for me, it was sort of like Augusta National golf privileges. You don't get inducted into Augusta National um, club if you ask to be a member.
fair enough. So
So
to your point, as a former member of the Augusta National Club, if you will, what skills are essential, you think, to be a commissioner?
well, that's a really hot topic right now. But, I would just say from my view of what the FDA basically is, I would say the skills needed are expertise in health and policy related to health. And in my view, a mentality of a referee, that is someone who calls the shots fairly and is protective of the rules of the game, as being the most important element. But part of the skill of being an expert in health and health policy is an understanding also that the persistent drive for creativity and innovation and the amazing importance of luck in terms of what ends up making a difference, those things also need to be in the equation. Now, the skill that I'm not great in is what I would call raw politics. And, I think there's an alternative view of the FDA that's a political instrument. And while I believe that policy is fundamentally a political exercise, that grounding in health and in fairness and in the rules to me would be essential qualities.
You said you need to be a referee. A referee is always one who's not playing on the field. They're just calling the shots. The FDA has a unique perspective of being judge, jury, and executioner in that they are seeing the information, they're deciding if this is the right direction, and then saying yay or nay. But you also get to call the sentencing. You get to go, no, you're not doing this anymore.
I mean, I was captain of a state championship basketball team. Let me tell you that if I cursed at a referee, the referee had the authority to say, "You're not doing this anymore. You're out."
Right.
Um, I think about it. I once substituted as assistant coach on one of my kids' soccer teams, and the woman who was the coach started yelling at the referee, and she was ejected from the field. So that's not unique to FDA. I still see it as part of refereeing.
Okay.
The FDA should not be the combatant on the field. If you look at the preseason and the practices, there's very often collaboration between the referees and the coaches and the teams. That's all part of the game. You want to make the game as good as it can be. You admire it when the game is played well. But your job is not to make the rules. Your job is to call the shots according to the rules. The rules are made primarily by Congress in the form of laws and by the executive branch, where the FDA, just like referees, can suggest, hey, we got this problem in the
Right.
game. It needs to get fixed. Here's what we suggest. But nothing gets done by the FDA that's a rule without going through OMB, Office of Management and Budget. And if it's really important to the country, it goes all the way to the executive branch. Just witness the menthol tobacco issue that, I mean, basically, I lost to Al Sharpton at the level of the highest level of the White House on that issue. So I think it actually is one of the things I'm adamant about, that so many people think the FDA should do this or that when it's really not. Like financial incentives. FDA can't give financial incentives. FDA needs a law in order to do
Right.
it. It can execute the program. And I really, really believe in the impartiality of referees. And I think when politicians, including the commissioners, start injecting their personal views about individual products, not policies. Policies are political.
Right.
The judgment about an individual product based on those policies, that's a refereeing function.
Right.
I'd highly recommend, by the way, there's a podcast by Michael Lewis. The title of it is Ref, You Suck. And, um, one of the main points is it used to be the poorest players who complained the most about the refereeing. Now it's the wealthiest prima donnas who are doing the most complaining. And I think America in general needs a correction in that regard, that the prima donnas have too much sway over the referees.
That's a really interesting perspective. So I love that. As you pointed out, you lost to Al Sharpton in the menthol issue, if you will. But the FDA has always used guidances. And the FDA does take the position the guidances are non-binding on both parties. So it's just our position at the current moment, and it does not reflect anything more than that. But the truth is, everyone knows if you're going to mess around with guidances, you really better have a really good reason, because it's going to come back to bite you, and everyone wants to take the easiest path. So using that same analogy, aren't you in many ways making the rules and then refereeing those same rules?
When two players collide, it's a foul on somebody. And there is a rule about, if the defender is stationary and the offensive player runs into a stationary defender, that's a charge. If the defender is moving, it's a block. But that's a very difficult, when especially in college sports or professional, where you're going a gazillion miles an hour with people that are super talented, there are a lot of nuances.
Right.
And the referees every year have meetings and decide what the points of emphasis are going to be, and they let people know. It's very similar. And I would say with regard to guidances, I may be wrong about this, but my impression is in almost every other federal agencies with my fellow agency leaders, the industries they regulate hate regulations. I think in the medical products industry, people want guidance. They
I agree.
need, and a guidance, remember that the fundamental law that's underpinning what the FDA does for drugs and then devices that followed on was um, benefits outweigh risks from adequate and well-controlled studies and the views of experts in the field. So a good FDA guidance is not just the FDA's opinion, it's a result of a back and forth iteration that occurs between the FDA and experts in the field. And I think this is what not just the industry needs, but also the clinical community benefits greatly from a well-done FDA guidance. So I think I would argue the analogy
Still holds.
still holds.
Fair enough. Um, I've always wondered at a practical level, I know if I'm guiding a company, it's a medical device company, I'm still looking at the drug guidances, because I go, there's some learnings that I can take over, even though there's technically either no statutory basis or there's no guidance basis to it. Is that the right way to think about it? Or was there a reason it was created for one center versus another?
I come from an academic medical center background, and here I think there's another analogy. I mean, you have the practice of medicine, and you
Right.
have the Department of Medicine, the Department of Surgery. People are doing a lot of things differently, but underlying it is a common set of principles and approaches that are used and taught in the practice of medicine. And I think it's the same at FDA. You have a different set of laws actually that govern these different products.
Right.
And then you have cultures which are built around a constituency, which tends to be the industries that make those products. So the FDA is fundamentally regulating commodities or products, not the people.
Right.
Um, on the other hand, let's say you're a patient um, with heart disease. I'll just use, my specialty of cardiology. You'd really hope that, the right treatment for me would not be determined by entirely different criteria if it was a device versus a drug. You just want to know which is better or how to combine them. And so, no matter how you slice it, you've got these silos of drugs, devices, biologics. But you've also got this cross-cutting issue of the patient underlying it and the fact that many of the elements in the industry are common and the fact that they're combination products, and we need more of those that are effective. So I think what you said is smart, and that is you should primarily function by the guidance that comes from the center that regulates your product, but being aware of the others and also watching for those cases where it is a guidance from all of them. That's also important. So it's not a simple clear-cut issue. These are human beings that are doing
Right.
this. So sometimes it's a very logical reason. Sometimes it's just that there was an obstinate person in one center who didn't want to do it. And, in the intelligence of working on things, it may be important from time to time to know which is which.
Enjoying our content? We'd love to hear more. Please like, comment, share, and find more.
Now with the court saying we're not going to defer to the agency's opinion just because the law has changed, the law has evolved, is that causing chaos at the agency level in terms of like how do we regulate if our basis of regulation, if our understanding of our expertise is not given the same weight, if you will?
Well, I don't think it's causing chaos. I mean, I think sort of like Citizens United, I think it's a place where the courts have gone completely off the rails in terms of what's good for our society
Right.
and are creating, when people ask me today, what's the biggest health problem in the US? My answer is wealth inequality. That's the
Interesting.
biggest issue. Money is calling all the shots in this country right now. And, but, that's an aside. Um, Everybody saw this coming. So if you talk to Liz Dickinson and Mark Raza, the two chief counsels during my terms, I think they would both tell you there was a planning at the FDA for the loss of Chevron deference going back over a decade. And what it really means is just you need a much stronger administrative record. And what we also know is that lower court decisions are going to depend on which lower court the thing is brought to. And, I think that's another policy disaster. The idea that you can get a perfectly predictable answer from the Fifth Circuit of Texas is outrageous and just creates all kind of problems. Um, so no, I don't think it's caused chaos. It just means you got to work a lot harder, and it, I think, is part of an overall societal loss of confidence and expertise. And it's a problem, but it's not chaos.
My question to you is, you said the biggest problem with health right now is wealth inequality. Love to hear why you say that, what your thoughts are, and kind of build from there.
Oh, and it's all tied up with education and where you live. Those factors, I think of it as we have traditional disparities that are still very much in play, particularly race and ethnicity. But the big emerging factors, I mean, if you are, half of Americans couldn't raise $5,000 for an emergency medical issue right now.
Right.
And if you're really wealthy, you can get whatever you want plus more. And the system is very much set up for you to succeed in your health interests. And, it goes all the way down to health, not just medical care. If we think about, what we now know, which is not new, but it's really been reinforced. If you want to live longer and be more functional, you need to eat healthy food, exercise, not use combustible tobacco, not take illicit drugs that lead to overdose, and take care of your mental health. Well, what low-income person can afford to eat healthy food now? You can't go to the gym if you're having to work two jobs. Um, it can be depressing because the chances of rising up from that environment are pretty low in the US now. This is a big change from the way it used to be. And so all those factors that really drive length of life, it's not medical care that drives length of life. It's the underlying factors. They're really stacked. And I think purposefully so, to the advantage of the wealthy. And then you look at it and say, we have single individuals worth $300 billion now. That's outrageous when you have half the country unable to raise $5,000. I mean, who's going to go to the emergency room if it's going to bankrupt your family? If you look at survival rates and functional status rates, I will debate anyone on that topic.
I see you right now flipping roles, if you will. One is from the perspective of deep agency expertise, and the second as a physician. You're talking, for those people who don't know, about social determinants of health, which is really, really interesting by itself. Raises questions. I'd argue Republicans or libertarians would say, well, why should we talk about gun control in the doctor's office? Or why should we talk about wealth and inequality in the doctor's office? And you're going, because it affects health.
Let me just interject. Please. The leading cause of death in children in the U.S. is gun violence.
Right.
And I was just in Ireland. Proud to say I was inducted into the Irish Royal Academy of Medicine, which was a lot of fun.
Congratulations.
The cops there don't even have guns. They don't need them.
Great.
And here we are with the biggest cause of death in our children being guns, and we act like we shouldn't talk about it. That's just absurd.
We're talking about social determinants of health. With all that in mind, how does the FDA play a role in social determinants of health?
I mean, it has some very specific roles. Generic drugs is probably one of the biggest. And I think generic drugs are really underappreciated as a major tool of public health. Most of the things that lead to early death, let's assume you took care of gun violence, opioid overdose, um, that would cut about half of the difference. We live 5 years shorter than the average high-income country. We're the worst of all
Oh, I didn't know
high-income
that.
countries, far
Wow.
and away the worst in losing ground. But if we just took care of gun violence and opioid overdose, that would be about half of it. The rest of it is mostly common chronic disease, and we know what the risk factors are, and most of them are controllable with generic drugs. Even if you eat bad food, if you can take a statin and take your blood pressure medicine, and soon there'll be generic anti-obesity medicines. This has a big effect on how long people live and how functional they are. So generic drugs are really important. But there's also tobacco. We still have 30 million combustible tobacco users, and these are not the 30 million residual out of our 320 million people, very heavily weighted towards people with serious mental illness, living alone, uninsured, poor. Um, so FDA has a major role there in trying to figure out what to do about that. And then, of course, nutrition. FDA is responsible for labeling of food. It doesn't control the subsidy that occurs through the USDA, the enormous subsidy of bad food that is government spending that could better be spent. But it has a voice, and that's important.
It's interesting. You didn't mention digital tools and health tech in the same way because there's billions of dollars going to that space. How game changing is it to have a Fitbit, an Apple Watch, whatever that counts my steps? Or is it a lot of hype for a lot of tech vendors? And while there may be some kernel of truth, kernel of information in there, getting steps is not a bad thing, but it doesn't have the same impact on health that we probably want to have.
I was at Google at the time. Between my FDA stints, I worked at Alphabet. And it was amazing to me, no matter how much work was done on the user interface, the wealthy and highly educated, if it was good, you know, took it up immediately and took advantage of it. Less advantaged people had much more difficulty and often didn't take advantage of it. And I think one of the great tragedies that sort of reinforces what's going on now is all that money allocated to put high-speed internet throughout the United States and the Biden administration didn't get spent. And there's a great um, graph I show all the time from the Wall Street Journal that shows that if you intersect the areas that don't have doctors with the areas that don't have high-speed internet, they completely intersect with each other. In other words, a place where digital could make the biggest difference, you can't even get to people because they don't have the bandwidth to
Right.
employ the technology the way it really could be done. So it has great potential, but right now, most digital technology is being used to make the worried, wealthy, high-income people feel better about themselves.
Because that's what the
This
margins
healthy
are.
longevity thing is crazy. I mean, you have billionaires wanting to live to be, 200 years old when we are paying very little attention to the needs of low-income people.
Follow our page on LinkedIn. What do you say to those people who go, oh, people from there's a revolving door between agency and industry, and that's where the problem lies, and that's what we're trying to fix. I'll give my perspective first, where I go, that's ridiculous, because if you have an expertise, why wouldn't you use the expertise? No one else would be hiring for that expertise. Am I supposed to go work at McDonald's just because I work in the agency? That's my perspective. But I'll be fair, I expect your perspective similar, but I think it's probably more informed than mine is. So love to hear your thoughts.
It's a complicated question. I'm going to shamelessly refer to my Substack, where I'm going to put out a few chapters on the revolving door. And just to mention a few components of that are issues, I generally agree with your view. If you know the rules of the game really well, we want the industry to play the rules of the game well. And so having expertise that goes back and forth is important on the industry side, to have people who actually understand how the FDA works. And on the FDA side, imagine trying to regulate gene editing if you have no one who had ever done gene editing in a commercial environment. Just doesn't make any sense at all. There's also, just look at today in the shameless Doge thing that happened. What is a 30-year-old PhD supposed to do, who came to the FDA to spend a career in civil service and now is tossed out on the street? Are they not supposed to use and can't get a job in academia because no one's hiring, because research dollars have been cut?
Yeah.
It's obscene to even suggest that they shouldn't seek a job in an industry when they've invested so much into what they know. And yet there are problems. And so, like a lot of complicated things in life, there's so much of it in how the rules are constructed and how the game is played on behalf of society. Um, I, I just don't subscribe to the idea that, FDA people should be nerdy people who sit at a desk and someone throws a dossier at them with all the data in it, and somehow they can make a judgment as to what the benefit and risk balance is in a complex society. That's just nonsense in my view. On the other hand, if someone cheats, you know, that should not be allowed, and there should be a price for it. I'm just surprised you didn't mention, I mean, today there's a lot of tumult at the FDA. You didn't
I know.
word. Let me just say one word about
Please.
that. It does relate back to what I said before, that I think RFK, and I'll be specific about it, has promoted an environment in which political appointees are reaching in to change what the civil service does. And that creates, it's been called a toxic environment in the press over the last 24 hours. I'm not there. I have no connection to the leaders who are currently there. I have no inside knowledge about it. But it worries me deeply to read the things that I'm currently reading. And for the industry out there, I would hope people will just continue to play by the rules, develop the evidence that's needed for good decision making, and to the extent possible, put pressure on the administration to keep. It's okay for the politicians to be involved in to make the policies. That's what they should do. But individual products should not be the purview of people who are politically appointed.
Any last words? How can people subscribe to your Substack, for example?
If you just Google my Califf and Substack, it'll pop up, and I'm going to have about 100 chapters, about one a week. So I don't pretend to have all the answers, but as you pointed out, I've had a career in clinical medicine. I ran intensive care units, a career in academic and university leadership. I've been on the boards of device companies and biotech companies, and done a lot of clinical trials with big pharma, and also, been on the regulatory side and the big tech side. So I've seen it all. I have perspectives and I have opinions. I can understand where people could disagree, and that's fine, but I'm going to put them out there for people to consider. And, I'm also 74 and have been a political appointee twice, and I'm not looking for a job or an NIH grant. So I'm not constrained by things that are keeping a lot of people from saying what they believe right now.
Dr. Califf, an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for doing this. We appreciate it, and I hope, please go subscribe to the Substack. I know I will be. And it was incredible having you on. Thank you again for joining us.
Good to be with you. Have a good day.
Call, click, or email